So I've shown a few people this PC build over the past couple of weeks. They know it looks different, but they don't really know why. They can't put their finger on what specific thing it is that makes this build look unusually clean. But if you take a closer look, where there's usually cables, connectors, plugs, fan headers, it is completely blank. And that's because they're all exiting out the back. Here is the motherboard 24 pin, here are the CPU 8 pins. They just plug into the back of the motherboard like that. So this is a new trend happening in the PC space right now. Personally, I am all for it. It may look like a total mess at the back here, but the interior compartment, the result is super clean. Gigabyte were actually the first company to do this, to my knowledge at least, with something called Project Stealth. My impressions of that were that it was, kind of cool, maybe a little bit gimmicky, but mostly it was just like this cool prototype that would never really become a thing. Fast forward to today though, you can actually buy these components. What I'm showing you today is not like a concept or anything like that. This whole rear motherboard cable thing is something that you could actually build with if you really wanted to. The case specifically is the MSI M100R Project Zero. It's a relatively big micro ATX case, huge glass portion on the front which wraps around showing off all of your hardware, and it actually comes with inverted fans mounted on the side. These 3 fans are actually pulling air into the case. Usually you'd see a fan hub and frame from the interior, but now all you see is the RGB illumination and the fan blades, which is pretty neat. I know other companies have already done this, but it's pretty cool to see those pre-installed. Now this rear connector feature is really easy to implement on the case side of things, because all you really need to do is make a larger cutout right behind where those connectors are, and that's pretty much it. The connectors can then pass through. You can also see as well on this case, there are the usual 24 pin and 8 pin cutouts, so that you can actually use it with a normal motherboard down the road if you plan to. Speaking of motherboards though, that's where this gets really interesting. Here I've got the B650M Project Zero, also from MSI. Something that I didn't realize until I saw this firsthand was that every connector on this board is on the back. Not just the main power plugs, but every single fan header and RGB header, they are all completely hidden from the front. Now, not only is this more visually appealing from the interior, not to see all of these unsightly fan headers and stuff like that, but it's actually way more functional too. There have been times where I've mounted the motherboard in the case and then installed a large tower air cooler like a Noctua NHD15. Some of these fan connectors are literally impossible to access. So having them all accessible at the top here, on the side, down here, that is so much more functional compared to, trying to reach around a CPU cooler or underneath your GPU down here, for example. Another really cool thing about this layout is that you could be using the ugliest, most basic set of power supply cables, but still have an aesthetic build like this, which usually you'd have to spend $100–150 on a cable mod extension or replacement kit. That stuff gets pricey, especially if you haven't factored it into your build. Whereas with this layout, it literally doesn't matter. Now, something that I'm actually not a big fan of with this case, and it's not even kind of exclusive to the rear-facing connector discussion here, but it's this integrated fan and RGB hub for the pre-installed fans. It is just an absolute mess. I mean, how are MSI gonna make this clean, minimal case, but then ship it with this abomination? I know it's not visible, you can't see it, but it is still part of the experience, and yeah, it is an absolute jungle back there. I am not a fan at all. This actually ties pretty nicely into my next point, which is that MSI did send me an AIO to put in this build, but I'm actually not going to use it for these same reasons. There are cleaner, more cable-free solutions out there, like this Corsair Link 360. I mean, if we really want to make this build as clean as possible with minimal wiring, in terms of liquid coolers, I think this is probably one of the better options out there. The fans are all connected with pogo pins, which dramatically cuts down the amount of cables needed, and where you'd also have a bunch of different cables pouring out of the pump block, here you have none at all. There is some hidden wiring through the hoses which you can barely see, and there are still a couple of visible cables near the radiator that need to be connected, but for the most part, all of the main connections can be done completely out of sight, and it's still very simple and straightforward. There is one more piece to the puzzle, of course, which is the GPU, and that's where this build kind of falls apart, or at least gets a little bit more frustrating for me, because we still have this visible connector. Otherwise, there are no real visible wires in this entire build. Now, I did 3D print this, which is basically just, a simple cable guard, which covers that front 16-pin connector. It also works as a bit of a GPU support as well. But does it improve things? Honestly, I don't really know. I don't really think so. It definitely hides the cable, but it's not an ideal, ultra clean solution. What would be ideal here would be a rear-facing connector at the back of the graphics card, and I have seen a few GPUs out there with that. I tried so hard to get one for this build, but I just can't find them available anywhere, even internationally. I do think though, by the time next Computex rolls around, this will likely be one of the more trendy, newer things on display, and hopefully there is even more hardware to choose from, new motherboards, new cases, and hopefully new GPUs as well. Because you have to agree, it looks immensely clean. You know, I have to confess, flashy mid-tower builds are not really my thing. I prefer more of the ITX stuff, but this is something that I can definitely approve of. There doesn't seem to be much of a premium on this hardware either for this hidden cable look. The case from MSI is a pretty typical mid-tower pricing, and the motherboard is currently sitting at $230, whereas a similar B650 board would be around $170. I would probably wait until the next round of hardware launches and then see if this is something that you're still interested in, see if other companies are diving in as well, and see what other options you have available to you. Upgradability is something that you'll want to think about. But yeah, even if you jump in now and you build something like this, then you are left with an ultra clean PC.